Kia ora and good evening. We are coming to you hot from the south. You know that revival starts in the south. My name is Cliff Thompson. This is my homeboy over here. Give us your name, brother.
Good evening. My name is Crouching Bodhi Hidden Dragon.
So
also
slick.
known as Bodhi Friend. That is me.
But it does bring us to that time now where we're going to, fairly early into the piece, we're going to bring our guest, our special guest in tonight. And it's a real privilege tonight to bring this man in. He's a great man, a man of esteem. And I know for us here in South Auckland, it's not often that you get to sit with a principal for good reasons and you get to roast your principal and have some fun with your principal. But no, we're gonna bring in any second now John Tucker, the Honourable John Tucker, the Right Honourable John Tucker, into the show tonight.
John.
Kia ora, John. Great to have you.
Kia ora.
Really
Good
nice
to see you guys.
Yeah, you too. And thank you again for making the time to come on and enlighten us and encourage us. And I feel just so much wiser now just having you on my screen. Yeah, right. My levels of wisdom have increased by 10% just by having you on. And I must say, you know, it's just a privilege to be able to have such a good-looking Christian on the show as well. I mean, second to Bodhi, but
they don't call him Handsome John for nothing.
That's right.
Such a good-looking guy. But anyway, let's stop man-crushing right now and let's get into having this conversation with you, John, without giving too much away. On a real serious note, John, maybe just to start with, tell our viewers, people that are watching tonight and people that might even rewatch this, you know, for those who don't know you and a bit about who you are, if you start there, who are you? What's your whānau makeup? Where you're from? Give us a bit of that kōrero to start with, John, and then we'll pick the conversation up from there.
Yeah, sure. So John Tucker, I am ko Owairaka te maunga. I grew up in Mount Albert. Owairaka is my maunga. Grew up in the shadows of that beautiful mountain. So really an Auckland boy, Central Auckland. Ended up coming to faith in Jesus at Mount Albert Baptist amongst the community of beautiful people there. Ended up making my way to Auckland University, studied law, ended up as a young lawyer, commercial litigation, didn't really enjoy it particularly, realised after a couple of years of practicing law, that was long enough to know I didn't want to spend the rest of my life doing law, in my case. So found myself at a bit of a crossroads and ended up really sensing that God was saying, I want you to study theology for a season. So I ended up at Carey, a theological college, trained there to be a pastor, and ended up pastoring a church on the North Shore where we still live, but made my way from there into a doctoral program at Otago University, did some study on the history of the church, our whakapapa, and really passionate about that. And in the course of doing that study, was invited onto the team at Carey Baptist College, a theological college in Penrose, and I've been there for the last 10 years and loving it, and the last couple as principal. Yeah. So with that, maybe if I can ask, we're going to see a few photos in a moment, but what's your family dynamic? Your family, your kids, your makeup. Yeah, cool. So I'm married to Lorraine, and we've been married for 20 years. Yeah, over 20 years, coming up 25 years actually. And we've got and she also works with me at Carey, and then we've got three kids, two teenage girls, 17 and 15, Emma and Sophie, and a little boy who's 12 but going to be a teenager at the end of the year. So that's our family. And we're in absolute chaos at the moment because we've been we were trying to sell our house last year and it didn't quite work out for one reason or another. And then we bought a house and put our house on the market the very next day. And that day or that week was when the COVID-19 crisis on the distance, kind of on the horizon, started to break against the shores of Aotearoa. And we went through to an auction meant to be one weekend, a few weekends ago, and it got cancelled because that was the first weekend of lockdown. So we've been sitting here in a house thinking, oh no, we need to kind of make this move in a few weeks, and and we just found out yesterday that our house is sold, but they will have to move out on Saturday. So
Oh,
18
right.
years living here, and we've got 2.5 days to pack up and clear out. So
And you're on the show.
Crazy.
yeah, everyone else is upstairs packing.
Hey, priorities, right? No, that's awesome, John. Thank you so much for giving us some insight into that and also to the chaos. Hey, look, one thing you said there is you gave us that sort of really condensed version of your story and your background. You talked about, and something that sort of made my ears prick up, you talked about becoming a pastor and being a leader for a season over the shore. In that season, what was it that in particular led you to feeling the call on your life to be a pastor, a shepherd? Because I mean, even as a principal now, you're still shepherding people, but just in a different context, in a different way. But what was it initially that drew you to feel like the call of pastoral leadership, shepherding people, was on your life?
Oh yeah, great question. I'd love to talk about that. I remember as a youngster, like probably a young teenager, and then going into young adulthood, experiencing something. My heart warmed. Something special happened when I heard preaching, when I heard someone opening up the Word of God and speaking that over a congregation, over a gathering of people. Something special happened. I almost felt the sense that I was drawn towards it, and I didn't know why. But I would hate to do that. That would be terrifying, and yet I can't help but, like a moth to the flame, I feel as though I'm going to do that. It's a really strange kind of sensation. But then one day there was an opportunity to do a short preaching course at church, and I was 20 and I did that. Ended up, as part of the course, I had to preach at church, and I thought it was a train wreck, but someone came up to me, a lovely old lady, the next week after I'd preached, and she said, I was at a kind of like a prayer meeting during the week, and I just had a vision of you, and you were preaching, you were holding the Bible in your hand, and you were speaking a word from God to people. It was life-giving, and I think God's saying that you need to prepare for this. And I thought, okay, thanks, lady, that's really nice, but I'm training to be a lawyer, and I've got another path. So I went off to law, did that for a bit, but then I realized, there was this deep sense of dis-ease about the path that I was on, and this calling that wasn't really mine, and as a lawyer. And I felt this voice, kind of, the Lord saying, you've thought about preaching, you've had this draw, this calling, and you've often thought about doing study in theology because you just want to put your roots down deeper in your faith. You want to know me better. You want to be better equipped to live for me and with me in this world. So why don't you go study theology, and I'll make it clear what you're to do from there. And so it just seemed like that's where God was saying I should go. So I turned up at Carey as this young, kind of washed up, somewhat frustrated lawyer, thinking, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I don't know, but I do know I'm meant to be here for this season, studying the scriptures and really kind of putting some foundations down in my faith. So I found myself there for 3 years, as it turns out, because people there in the Carey community said, we see something in you. You should be training to be a pastor. Don't just study theology. Like, you need to be formed to be a pastoral leader. And I was like, well, I don't see that. But if you see that, and if my pastor sees that, and if others in the community of faith around me who know me and who I trust are saying that over my life, then I'll trust you. So I went on to the pastoral leadership training program, but I was still feeling this inner anxiety, bit of angst. Like, is this really me? It's quite a thing to be a pastor. Like, I think, there's a burden and a responsibility with that. And so I was still in two minds, and I was sitting in chapel at Carey one day in my last year of study there. I was crying out to God saying, Lord, if this is you, if Jesus, if you are calling to me, if this is you, tell me to come to you on the water. I need to hear you really clearly. And I was sitting in this chapel service one day, and someone's reading the words of John 21, when the risen Christ accosts Peter on the beach. Peter's denied him 3 times, but in front of a charcoal fire on the night that Jesus was arrested, and Jesus makes this charcoal fire on the beach for Peter, and he says, hey, Peter, do you love me? 3 times he asks him, do you love me? Just, like like Peter 3 times had said, I don't know him, and denied him. And each time Peter goes, well, yes, I do love you. I want to love you. And Jesus says to him, then feed my sheep, take care of my lambs, feed my lambs. And I was hearing this passage being read out, and people would sit around me, this is just a chapel service. We sit in these every week. But the risen Jesus was in that room right then saying those words to me, John, do you love me? And I don't know how, but I just knew in that moment he was saying, if you love me, then I want you to feed my sheep. I want you to be a preacher. I want you to speak my word. I want you to build up and care for my people. And so I just knew in that moment I was going to be a pastor. And that was one thing led to another.
Yeah, so good, John. And I just think about that, and you're talking about that story there. You're sitting there, you hear that call, but you also mentioned that there are a number of people that had sort of maybe even seen it before you'd seen it. They'd seen something in you, that something was revealed to them. How did you, and someone that might be listening to this right now, how do they, whether it's courage or we call it, might be craziness or spiritually taking that step of faith, how does someone do that even though they might not quite be sure, or they hear others saying, look, I can see this in you. What is that, maybe one or two things, or what is that thing that helped you say, you know what, I'm going to press in, I'm going to put my fear aside or my anxiety aside or not being sure aside and say, you know what, Lord, I'm going to step into it. I'm going to take some courage. What was that moment for you, or how did you come to that revelation? How might others be able to know that voice of God as well?
Yeah. I think it comes differently for everybody. Like, I don't think there's just a template that, that suits everyone. In my case, I needed to hear Jesus because of my sense of weakness. I needed to hear him very clearly. And so, in that chapel, he chose to use the words of John 21 to say, if you love me, this is what I'm asking of you, John. I want you to give your life to feeding my sheep. But that was, I think of David in the Bible and the story of, this young shepherd boy who becomes king of Israel, and, a prophet, not unlike that old prophetic voice of the lady who came to me, in church that night. A prophet, Samuel, comes to David and anoints him with oil and says, this is the anointing of God on your life. You're going to be king of Israel one day. And David's like, oh, okay. And then he's out there in the fields, playing his harp, looking after the sheep, fighting off the bear and the wolves. And he's learning these skills, but he's also reflecting, I'm sure, on those words of Samuel. And then he has these experiences where he suddenly finds himself, defeating giants on behalf of the Israel army and getting called into the king's service. And he's moving in the direction, it would seem, of serving one day maybe as king. Yeah. And then the people of Israel come around him when he's being chased by Saul, a jealous king chasing him, and people gather around David and they say, look, we see something in you. We think you're going to be the king one day after Saul. And they gather around him. And then ultimately, Saul's own son, Jonathan, comes up to him and says, look, I know I'm not going to be king, even though I'm the king's son. It's going to be you, David. And so I look at a story like that and I see, there's someone who feels something subjectively inside, but he's also experiencing this narrative, these voices out from outside. There's an objective call where the community identifies, they discern something, as well as the person themselves discerning something. And for me, that's really significant with making a decision. If we've got a sense that the Lord's calling us somewhere, and the rest of His people think, nah, it doesn't seem right to us, then that's that should give us cause for concern. But in my case, there was a kind of like a resonance between what I had sensed the Lord was saying and what others were identifying. And so that was, I don't trust myself to always discern, to listen, perfectly to what Jesus is saying at all. But if there's a whole bunch of people who are all saying the same thing, then it's time to sit up and listen.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I think even on my own journey so far, those things resonate with having those other voices in your life that can just give you that guidance, that clarity, that revelation even of what God might be nudging you toward. Because now, if we progress it forward a little, obviously you wouldn't. I'm pretty certain just from hearing the story, you hadn't imagined at the time that you were going to end up not let alone being a lawyer, pastor, and then one day the principal of Carey College. But yet here you are, and God's taking you on that journey. So if we fast forward to now, or the last few years as the principal of Carey College, something like COVID-19 hits, and it's something that catches most people unaware. In those moments for you, now you've got a whole faculty, a whole curriculum to think about, people's learning, staff, all of this to navigate through. What were some of the sort of immediate challenges that you had to think about, process? Because I know that sort of stuff as a leader would really help people, because a lot of them obviously be in the same boat. But what were some of those upfront challenges for you, John, initially? And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that they might have either turned into or are presenting as we go forward.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, one of the immediate challenges was that the week before we went into lockdown, we had our 4-yearly review by the government, by the New Zealand Qualifications Authority. So this is a really big thing, high stakes. It's a bit like what's the term that's used for a review of a school when it gets its big kind of audit effectively? It's the equivalent at a university level, and it's a really big deal. So 2.5 days of full-on audit, just kind of one panel meeting after another, being grilled. That happened the week before we went into lockdown. So we were sitting there with these assessors from the government thinking, why are we doing this? Like there are more pressing things to be addressing. So we would go out of these meetings with the government into, crisis emergency planning sessions to work out, okay, so what are we going to do? When is lockdown going to happen? It's not far away. So that was an immediate challenge. For us, the big challenge and the question that we were asking immediately was, how do we move not just a staff team, a learning community online fully, but how do we move all of our programs online? We offer certificates, diplomas, bachelor's level degrees in applied or integrative theology, and then we offer a master's program right up to supervising PhDs, so the full suite. And at the undergraduate level, most of our formal academic courses were delivered in a blended format. So you could either do it online or you could do it on site at our campus in Penrose. So that was great. For most of our courses, we could just say, oh, look, if you're an on-site student and we go into lockdown, you just do the online version of this course. It's fine. And so that was brilliant. But we also offer block courses. And so some of those, I mean, if it's a block course intensive, there's no online component. You just come up for a week, spend time with us. So we had to quickly pivot and move all of those into an online format. Our master's program, if you do a master's of applied theology with us, then all of that's block format. So none of that was immediately available online. But probably even harder than that was we have these formation programs. We're really hard at Carey. We want to form leaders for ministry and mission. And that's a whole lot more than just depositing knowledge or information or academic learning. I mean, that's really important. I think understanding the mission of God, understanding the gospel, understanding our whakapapa as, the people of God, all of that's really important to being a good leader. But it's only one component. That's got to be integrated with skills, the practice of leadership. You've got to have a go and be integrating what you're learning out there in the field with what you're learning in the classroom. And then we work really hard at the face-to-face engagement with those students that are on our ministry formation program. We try and disrupt them so that they become so kind of, in some ways, exposed to pressure and stress that what's inside them comes to the surface. And then we say, okay, that's what you need to deal with. And we're going to walk with you because if you're going to be a leader that's resilient and lasts and endures and is effective, and a lot of it will come down to your character and your spirituality. So we got to work on that, your foundations. So we've always said to our students, if you really want to go through a really significant ministry formation process, you need to be on site with us in our learning community at Carey. And so, going into a lockdown mode where all of this formation has to happen online. How does that work? Well, for me, the experience was not so much, how are we going to handle this? As a leadership team at Carey in the middle of this crisis. For me, it was a matter of standing back and saying, what isn't God incredible that hasn't he been faithful to us? He graciously, providentially directed us, I think, last year to start putting our formation programs online. That was something that we sensed we needed to do in order to serve the church more effectively right across Aotearoa. So this year, we've been planning it for months, but this year we started it at the end of February. We had 4 weeks of running an online blended formation program. And then COVID-19 hits. And so we say to our ministry training team, you need to go online completely. And they were like, okay, sweet. We're already started. We've ironed out all the bugs. We've had a month's pilot. Boom, we can do that.
Yeah.
So there was just the sense that God had almost, positioned us for this.
Yeah.
And that even goes so far as to, I guess the staff team, 2 years ago, and then even 5 weeks before COVID-19 hit, we employed a new systematic theologian, Krista McCurland, and she brought with her a husband who's got experience in IT and pedagogy and, learning support, at a university level. And he said, look, I've got a bit of spare time. I'm minding the kids. I'm a house husband, but love to help. And he was just perfectly positioned to resource us to make the online shift, fully online. So for me, it's not a great insight into, how you lead. It's a case of, I guess, testifying to the leadership of Jesus. We always say, Carey, I might be the principal and we might have a leadership team that I work with, but ultimately the shepherd of our community, the leader of this college, the CEO is Jesus. And that's been my experience. He's led us wonderfully because he knows what's going to happen, Yeah,
and I think, just listening to your kōrero there, I think about some of the things you had mentioned around the fact that for ourselves, it's instead of always trying to press in, I'm hearing that sometimes it's about actually stepping back and saying, Lord, what are you doing? What are you in control of? And I also even think the leadership lesson around that he has positioned and using what you have, using who God has brought along and allowing them to do those things are also really great leadership insights. Because I think a lot of the time in crisis mode, people can feel like they need to control everything and grab everything.
Yeah.
And you would know that, it's too much, but two, he gives you a team. He gives you other leaders for a reason that you can impart and release. And this is the moment where they step up and they shine, and you really see what they're made of.
Totally. And I think this is where it comes home to roost. Have you made good decisions and the people that you've appointed, and have you been investing in one another? And do you have a culture that enables them to then rise up and to express what God has placed in them for a moment like this? I think for me, one of the lessons has been I haven't had to come anywhere near close to micromanaging, but I agree that's one of the temptations. And for me, I guess one of my reflections would be that there have been times when our academic director has been working with our teaching team, the faculty, to get all of our programs realigned for an online world. And he knows how to do that. That's his world. He's occupied that so much more than I have. So he's just done it. And our executive director's been thinking through compliance and government and property, and she's operated in her sweet spot. That's her charism, that's her gifting. And it's been a case of, sometimes feeling a bit embarrassed, twiddling my thumbs, thinking, okay, so what do I do? And I think the, in my case, my leadership responsibility through these last few weeks has been to try and help us keep our eyes on Jesus as a community. We're stuffed if we stop listening to him and looking to him. At the beginning of the year, we decided that for our chapel, for our worship together as a learning community, we would make Psalm 121 our focus, our theme. So I lift my eyes to the hills, to the mountains, to the maunga. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And that's been such a gripping psalm for us, particularly as we've moved into this whole crisis. There's been a sense like, Jesus knew what was coming, and he's been saying to us, keep looking to me, keep listening to me. So tomorrow, our senior management team, we're actually going to connect for 3-4 hours and reflect on, so where is the Lord leading us in this? What's he saying?
Right.
We had our ideas at the beginning of the year, but maybe the Spirit is speaking through this, and what new opportunities are emerging, and there's some really significant ones. Like we decided, as I was saying, last year, that really the next step for us, amongst other things, is to really enhance and extend our online blended learning.
Yeah.
Well, we thought, okay, maybe in 3 years we'll get to, this point. And that happened in the space of, 1 week, just simply because we were forced to go into that place, And so I think there's lots that we're doing differently now. And it would be such a shame to not be reflecting and thinking about what do we need to preserve from this time in this season that's actually going to change the way we operate going forwards. Yeah.
No, that's great, John. And I like that train of thought. What is it that we need to preserve? And then also, what is the opportunity here that God's really, again, nudging us toward, that we've got to be, inclining our ear to, being tuned up and being ready to pivot, just like you've said. So that's fantastic to hear. That's great. I want to give some time to some questions for people, but I also, before we do that, I want to jump to some of the gold you've given us, some of your pictures that explain a little bit of your life, your journey. So we're gonna rattle through some of that now, and I'm sure some other kōrero will come out of them. But as they come up, just give us a quick synopsis of what's going on at this point of your life and what it represents.
Okay, so this is the teaching team at Carey. This photo was taken about a year or so ago. So a range of our faculty, both New Testament, Old Testament theology, Ngāpa Amorangi, our Maori leadership training program, just a range of our teaching team there. Yeah, beautiful people,
awesome.
Special people. This is not our teaching team. This is a bunch of noddies who I swim with on a Tuesday, on a Monday and a Wednesday night, and sometimes in the weekend. We're called Eddie's Eels. A mate called Ed, he started the group. You see Ian Jones there, actually. Can you see him second from the left? It's quite a group, actually. Ian, so the guy in the gold cap he's got a marathon, 2 hour 30-minute marathon behind him, and he's done Ironman. Ian Jones, legend All Black. The guy next to him is an Olympic gold medal rower, rode for New Zealand at the 84 Los Angeles Olympics.
Wow.
And on it goes. It's quite and then there's me. I don't know how I ended up here. So
the heavy hitters.
It's a good group. Yeah. So cool. We swim and and so it's I love swimming, cycling, running. So this is a shot from the Auckland Ironman 70.3 Ironman, the last one ever to be held in Auckland, across the harbour bridge. So I look quite comfortable there, but I was in a world of pain. Yeah.
Far out.
Stunning.
Yeah, that's the same event. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so this is my beautiful wife, Lorraine. And I actually, it turns out that I've got a few superpowers. I don't talk widely about it, but
makes sense now.
Yeah. So we're at I might have been a 40th birthday party or something like that. Yeah.
Nice. Here we go.
Yeah. So that's got a mouthful there, look like I'm eating a sausage. So that is Easter Camp 1987 or 86 or something like that.
How old were you there?
Yeah, so 16, I think, 15.
Wow.
Just so some of you can do the math out there now. 1987, right. 16 years old. Do the math, all right? Awesome.
Still don't know.
South Auckland, it's all good. You're around about that age. So thank you, John, for giving us an insight into that. We've got a few questions here we're going to kickstart with. I'm going to bring this first one up that I can see from Kemi. Hardest and easiest thing about running a school, college?
I think one of the hardest things, this is just springs to mind initially, is that you have, in our case, multiple stakeholders. So we're serving the church. That's our primary calling, is to raise up leaders, to equip those that have been identified with leadership ability to serve the church, to engage in mission. But then alongside the church, we've also got the government that's funding us in some measure to provide the service that we do. And so you've got these two bodies. One group is not at all committed to the Christian gospel, and so they're asking for certain kinds of compliance outcomes, those kinds of things. So sometimes it can get just not confusing, but just you can feel the tension, trying to serve the needs of multiple stakeholders. That would be one of the challenges. The easiest thing, just like Carey, is you're surrounded by really godly, gifted, beautiful teaching and faculty staff members. Sometimes it feels as though, and then not only them, but the students. I mean, they come often because they just want to grow in their faith. They want to walk in the ways of Jesus. They want to be used by him to make a difference in this world for his kingdom. And when you're in a community like that, sometimes I have to kind of pinch myself and think, does this really work? Like, do I get to participate in a community like this for a job? Like it's amazing. Yeah. It's like I'm in a discipleship program. Ongoing. It's really cool.
Oh, that's awesome. We got one from William Flesher here. Do you have people in your life who hold you accountable, and what does that look like?
Yeah, great question, William. I do. I have a spiritual director. So for a number of years now, I had a break there for a wee while, but when she moved out of Auckland, but I've decided to resume meeting with her just on FaceTiming online. So I meet with her once a month, and she asks me hard questions about my relationship with Jesus and and how I'm going there. Really important, because there's a book by a guy called Carson Pugh, who made a statement about Christian leadership. He says it's really scary how the more you go on in leadership as a Christian, the less people feel that they are able to ask you, how's it going with Jesus, you and Jesus? Because they assume that if you're a leader, a Christian leader, obviously everything's going great. And I think that's a danger for Christian leaders sometimes. And so it's really good having someone who can ask you those questions and provide encouragement and speak wisdom. And so I have someone like that, but I also have good mates going way back to school, way back to those Easter camps, who I continue to journey with. One of them's an Anglican vicar. We meet up every month and have honest kōrero. So I have a few people like that.
No, that's great, John. I really appreciate that insight. We got one from Amy here. This is a really deep theological one. John, what is a hobby and you enjoy and your favorite snack?
Great. A hobby that I enjoy. So I mean, like, I don't know if you could call it a hobby, but I love running, cycling, swimming, triathlon, that kind of stuff. I guess. I mean, I love sport, so I love watching it. I love playing it. I love playing touch rugby with the family. I love. I'm watching. Great comment earlier, Bodie. The Last Dance. I mean, I just man, what a great series! Just compelling. Such a good narrative.
Really good.
Yeah. So that they would be the closest things to hobbies. I love reading. I just love reading. Leaders are readers, right? I think that's just a really, really important principle. So I love reading. Yeah.
That's awesome. And Bodie did bring up your favorite snack. And look, for you to have that rockin' body you have, so athletic, it must be kale chips or something like that.
No. I've had about 3 or 4 biscuits and a big slab of chocolate cake today. I love. I mean, some people say they've got a sweet tooth, and some people say they really got a lot of salt, savory kind of tooth. I just love everything, and pretty much if you exercise heaps, you can eat anything, and it doesn't really matter. That's the reason.
That's
so unfair, eh, Bo? So unfair.
But pies, awesome. Give me a pie. I love a good pie.
Yeah, pies are good. From Osei, this is a big one. Apart from not enjoying your legal role, did your faith conviction contribute to how you saw the legal progression? It did for me.
Yeah. So so I only ever practiced, just for a couple of years as a civil and commercial litigation solicitor. So I was working in court, and I guess for me, I'm not sure if it was my faith informing this, but one of my observations was that the system, it felt so compromised by the expense, the financial expense, as well as the length and the pressure that the system imposed on some clients, so that even if they'd won, they felt like they'd lost. So you've won. You've either got the settlement you wanted, or you actually got the adjudication you wanted. And they say, yeah,
Right.
but I've lost my house. It's cost me 3 years of unbelievable stress, and this doesn't feel like a just outcome. And God is a God of justice. It's really interesting when you read the Bible in the Old Testament. It's almost as if God says, "Hi, pleased to meet you. My name's God. This is what I'm like. I really care for widows and orphans and refugees." He says that time and time again. Like I really want those who are vulnerable and oppressed to be cared for. I want relationships to be the way they should be. And it's just justice. God is a God of justice. And so I looked at the legal profession and thought, this is a beautiful thing because it's aimed in the direction of justice. But I also saw some of the weaknesses and the struggles in the system too. Yeah.
No, that's great, John. Look, we've got so many great questions coming through. We're not going to get to all of them now or tonight, but we will compile them, and then what we tend to usually do is send them through to you. And when you get a chance in between all your moving, if you could, you fire those back to us, and we'll put them up for people back on this post. But we're going to answer. Before I get to this one, there was that one that came through. I think it's pertinent for me to ask this from Graham Chamberlain, who you'll know. How's the six-pack looking these days?
You want to... Graham? Is that the real Graham? Is that...
Graham. That's the real Graham.
You're going to pay for that, Graham. You're going to pay for that.
But the answer?
Attention.
Yeah, that's right. Not looking great. Not looking great.
Awesome. Now let's go back to Munro's question, because it was a good one, and then we'll park it there for the moment. Can we find that question and bring that one back through?
About motivating lazy students. How do you do that?
Here we go. I'll ask the question as it was posed. Question: how are you handling those who aren't very motivated to turn up to online classes? So not quite lazy students, but
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. So yeah. I mean, there's a real challenge. That's one of the challenges that we're facing. There's nothing like. There is a certain pedagogy, a kind of a style of teaching and instruction and learning that suits the classroom, and it's very different online, and it's making that transition. It's a steep learning curve. So I think we're in the process of learning how to motivate students who don't want to come. How do we do this thing better? But I really believe that the best learning comes out of the context of relationship. Ultimately you learn best when those you're learning with, and those that are instructing or coaching you. And so we try and work really hard at relationships. So if as a student, that your lecturer cares for you, and that, they've actually got time for you, and they've shared something of their life, and they're passionate about what they believe, then you're much more likely, I think, to be engaged and committed to journeying, even when it's a bit difficult. So one of the things we do is we work really hard, and we put a lot of resource into providing student support, pastoral care for our students. So that's one of the things that we're doing, is we're just constantly, a number of the team are constantly on the phone or on Zoom, connecting with students, just saying, how's it going? How can we help? What do you particularly need? And amongst other things, we're also, surveying students, like, what's working for you? How can we change our practice? What would you suggest? And then responding to that, closing the loop. Just listening to students is a big part of learning how to serve them better, so that they want to come to class. Yeah.
I'm going to ask Bodhi first, and then John. The question is real simple, or the thought is, what is it that one thing, either an encouragement or that thing that's on your heart and your spirit right now, that you believe God is saying to you and to us, maybe in this season, that we could leave with people? So I'll start with Bodhi, and then we'll finish with you, John.
Kia ora. My thought that has been gathering my thoughts, thinking about what I was going to say, was I had the privilege of watching, but also posting Elisa's testimony onto our Facebook page, in which she spoke about forgiveness. And my encouragement to everyone is that in Christ, forgiveness can be found, and both given and received. So if, like, even forgiving your own self for stuff that's happened in the past, or needing to forgive someone else. And I think forgiveness is a big part, and a lot of us hold on to unforgiveness even when we do find Christ. and the opportunity that you find after forgiveness, it's just so much more blessing on the other side of that. So I would encourage, if there's anyone sitting around in lockdown with unforgiveness, put it at the feet of the cross and seek Christ in that, and let it go, and in terms of moving through that unforgiveness into a place. That would be my encouragement.
Cool words. And John, what's with you?
The first thought that came to mind when you mentioned it, Cliff, was this just a word about the sovereignty of God. I was teaching this week about a figure from history who went through incredible difficulties. I won't name them, but just such an incredible period of difficulty. And the question I asked the class was, how do you think they managed to endure that, to get through that crisis and come out the other side, not all beaten up and buckled? And what we know from that person is that they had a really big view of God and God's sovereignty. He was convinced that even though he was experiencing this really difficult time of resistance and opposition and criticism and abuse from people around him, that God somehow mysteriously was sovereign over everything, and he could stop it as soon as he wanted to, and he wasn't causing it, but he was somehow, for some reason, permitting it, and was promising that he would bring good out of it, as he says, in all things, God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. So I would just want to say that God is sovereign over your life and over your circumstances. COVID-19 didn't take him by surprise, and your circumstances he knows about, and he can bring good out of this crisis, and he can bring good out of what you're going through right now.
Amen to that, brother. That's so good.